Thank you. We're ready to begin. Please do take your seats. I now invite Sriram V, who leads global partnerships and fundraising at the Nudge Institute, to introduce the panel and moderate the session. Sriram, welcome. Could you please take your seats? Hi. Welcome, Aloka. We are joined today by an eminent panel, starting with Aloka Majumdar, Deepali Khanna, Kurush Irani, Prabhakar L, and the moderator Sriram. Sriram, over to you.
Thank you, Napina. Can I request the audience to settle down? Thank you. So, very pleased, excited, and looking forward to what I think is a truly diverse, a very good representation of the funding community in the Indian social sector landscape. It's truly an honor to receive the four esteemed guests. I'll briefly introduce all of them, starting with Aloka. Aloka is the Managing Director and Global Head of Philanthropy at HSBC, based out of Mumbai. I've had the pleasure of working with her for the last few years at HSBC. Welcome, Aloka. Thanks for taking the time out. We have Deepali Khanna, who is the Vice President and the Asia Head for the Rockefeller Foundation, driving impact for more than 100 plus years now. I've lost count. So pleasure to have you, Deepali, and thank you for flying down all the way to spend time with us. Followed by Kurush, President and Group Head for Sustainability at Bajaj in India, who's been sort of committed to skilling for a very long time. We'll delve that into a little deeper over the course of the next 1 hour. Last but not the least, Mr. Prabhakar from ITC. Again, not new to CSR, one of the largest CSR players in India, driving very transformative work in the space of climate resilient agriculture and many more. So it's a pleasure to have all of you. I look forward to the next few minutes. The way we'll do this is about 55 minutes of discussion. Audience can float their questions on the QR code that will flash on the screen, and we'll keep the last 10 minutes for questions to the panelists and moderated by myself. Awesome. Today, the next 1 hour, what we thought we will do is to structure the conversation along a few thematic areas. I want to begin with you, Aloka, to say a lot of you have been doing philanthropic work that predates the CSR law in many forms and shapes, and that's not new to the audience, certainly not new to me. But just to keep a certain milestone, in the last 10 years of post-CSR era, specifically, what are 2 or 3 things that you feel you've learned as HSBC in how you do CSR? That may be very relevant for the audience.
Sure, no, thank you so much, Sriram. And good to be here and good to see so many of us here actually. A lot of known faces in the audience, and of course look forward to meeting many more new people today. So, I've been in the sector for a very long time. And I'm covering 10 years. So in fact, I joined this sector way back in 2004. Just giving a bit of a background to say that I think I was one of the first hires by any foreign bank to look into citizenship or philanthropic work. So it was been, for me, I've actually seen the sector evolve from 2004 to now, which has been quite an exciting thing. If you ask me in terms of when I joined and what has changed, I think the first change has been from charity to development. I think when it was in the sector, while a lot of development work was being done, and there was it was very surprising to see the number of non-profits that we have in India, the grassroots organizations who were actually doing work at the on ground, understanding, the audience that they were working with. So I did see a big change in terms of bringing in from charity to development was the first thing that I saw. The second is I did see a huge amount of focus over the years on governance. And that is, I think, because of the amount that's come to the sector. So we have seen that organizations are actually investing to strengthen their governance, and it's both ways, by the way. So a lot of people think it's only from the non-profit sector. That's not the case. But even as a corporate sector, I think the governance in both sides has gone through a huge transformation over the 10 years. I think there is small things, very small, and that's maybe I'll cover in my thing. I do see an intention of collaboration, which was not there many years back. It was very much, working one-on-one relationship with the corporate and the non-profit. We did realize that as corporates, we were not talking to each other, and even as non-profits, nobody was talking to each other. So I think that I do see a change there, and I see that there has been a change. At least the intention, of course, a long way to go in this entire collaborative thing, but there has been some change in that. So I'll stop here.
Yeah. Thanks, Aloka. Can I, perhaps I'll come back to Deepali as this may not apply, but Kurush and Prabhakar, briefly from your lens, answer to the same question.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm part of the Bajaj FinServ CSR group, and Sriram, like you asked, many business houses like Bajaj have been associated with philanthropy many decades even prior to CSR coming as a law, right from the freedom struggle days. And I think you see that as you travel to different parts of the country, you see artifacts of that in terms of even physical infrastructure, whether in education, healthcare, different areas. From what I've heard, because I've not been in this role long enough to have seen the 10-year journey, but from what I've heard, some things have not changed. So, for example, even before the law came in, our chairman emeritus, Mr. Rahul Bajaj, he was personally involved in selecting the projects, went deep into the projects, a lot of time used to be spent. We see the same happening with the next generation also. So we see the same happening as we get into the projects and the discussions. They go into real depth. They're not at a fleeting level from the family perspective. I think quite similar to what Aloka has called out, what I've heard is that it's given more structure to it. It has given a programmatic view to things which maybe were not as structured always. It was not that it didn't exist, but maybe it was not consistent. It has boxed you in terms of what you can do. From what I've heard earlier, a lot more things were done, but now things are boxed in. Those continue to be done in an individual capacity, but not from a CSR perspective. So I think those are some of the changes, but there are good, healthy discussions on programs, how we can partner with the ecosystem, and the ecosystem could be like-minded funders, but increasingly with governments and platforms that can drive different change. And the board discussions are becoming more and more engaging in that direction, Sriram.
I think the changes that I have seen in the last 10 years, it's taken a more strategic intent. And one of the key enablers has been is after the law came, the boards have got actively involved. And because boards have got actively involved, it's getting that strategic space, mind space, so to say, in terms of conversations, which also is leading to organizations trying to leverage their domain competencies also to maximize the impact. The second change that I have seen is, Aloka referred to governance, I think a significant focus on metrics. And I moved into this space only 3 years back, and I jokingly say, and I've been in HR, so I jokingly say I'm following more metrics here than what I followed in HR actually, and metrics in terms of impact and outcomes. And the third one that I notice is visibility that has come after the 10 years mandate. A lot of newer players coming into the ecosystem, and therefore the opportunity to sort of collaborate more and more is a shift that I've noticed in the 10 years.
Deepali, you've heard all the panelists. What I wanted to ask you is, having been in, so to speak, the business of impact for more than 100 years now, what do you see as the role, as the fundamental role of philanthropy? Like, why should philanthropy exist, and what should it be solving for? If you have to future forward 10 years from now, based on what you've learned over the last century, how would you redefine philanthropy for the next maybe 25 years or so?
Thank you so much. And it's truly a privilege to be here with all of you. I think at the Rockefeller Foundation, we are really using a big bet mindset in terms of all that we are trying to do. And I think futuristically, if you look, that's the way probably we'll have to go. We really have to be looking at how do we put our resources behind scalable solutions. And again, time frame is going to be important because you're not going to see change in a year. You'll need a couple of years. Let me explain it in a more tangible way and also talk about the mission of the foundation. So we've been in existence for 111 years, and our mission has been the same, which is really to serve the well-being of humanity. In the current situation with the climate crisis, we are seeing that, we are kind of going backwards when it comes to advancing human progress. So as a foundation, we needed to do something, and you're talking about evolving and how we are learning. So last year, the UN General Assembly, we made a very bold commitment and said, we're going to be committing over $1 billion over the next 5 years around our climate strategy. And there are 2 pillars of our climate strategy. What we are going to be doing is first, really trying to see how we can get the world together to collaborate more effectively, because none of us can solve the climate crisis alone. So that's the first important pillar. The second important pillar is how do you really seize the opportunities and benefits of climate transition so that we can really get the billions of people who left behind to be part of it. So, again, this is something which is part of our evolution and our big bet mind approach. I think there's a simple idea behind our strategy where we are saying that, we don't have to take an either-or situation when it comes to climate. We'll have to address climate and look at economic progress together. I think currently if you're looking at, and this is what we do to kind of get to a place where we put our resources behind some big bets, is that we saw only 16% of funding was going to climate finance. And this is based on a recent report that we did along with BCG. Again, the resources were going either to mitigation programs or adaptation, but we weren't seeing how resources were flowing into the intersectionality of where people and planet was being most affected. So again, it's about choice making and looking with a future lens. We'll all have to make some tough choices. We as a foundation said, okay, we're going to look at intersectionality of climate around 4 systems, mainly food, health, power, and the financial system, because that's where we are best placed to really look at having a long-term view and be able to hold ourselves accountable in terms of what we can and should be doing. I think, again, as philanthropies, most of us are hardcore optimists, and we strongly believe that none of us can achieve work by ourselves. So going back, Aloka, to the point that you were making, collaboration is critical. And that's what we're really trying to constantly do and will want to do more in the years to come, is how do you get the unusual actors to, how do you inspire them, how do you connect with them, and how do you invest together to be able to solve for these big problems that are really facing humanity. I think that really is the need of the hour. And I'll end by saying, we need more of the public-private philanthropic partnerships going forward. In the past, we were talking about just public and private, but I think philanthropy can play an important role because of the catalytic funding that it can bring to the table.
On that note, Bali, I think my next sort of question is on staying on the point of the role of philanthropy futuristically. For the purpose of this conversation, if I break it down into three parts, one on the assumptions that if all of us who want to solve problems were able to solve problems in the last 75 years, then there is no need for this conversation, right? So we all acknowledge that fundamentally. We also want these solutions to be, philanthropic capital is also not an infinite spiral. There is a ceiling on it. So what is the best use of that capital that is available? Philanthropy, both CSR and otherwise included. The third is, what does leverage really mean, right? Because all of us want to, you spoke about $1 billion invested, but millions of people. Now, if that truly has to happen, then we all want the benefit to reach as many number of people as possible. So given that the solutions, there are certain solutions, including but not limited to climate, that have not been solved for, given that we only have so much money in the ecosystem, but we all have tall aspirations and big dreams, therefore in this construct, if I may say so, limitations, what then becomes the role of philanthropy across three dimensions? Again, if I put it, one is to seed innovations, because we need to continuously find newer ways of solving problems. If that is a hypothesis that can be assumed, we need the need to drive scalability of these innovations to see beyond proof of concept. And also, as philanthropists, you become thought leaders where you are able to influence the future stakeholders who will really drive the scale process. Along this spectrum, in any particular order, where do you see philanthropy heading forward, or do you think should be heading forward?
I think the first, Sriram, the point that when you said problems might have been solved. I think we are now in an era where we can't sit back assuming the problems have solved. The context keeps changing, and therefore there's a need to constantly reinvent and revisit. And the way I see philanthropy is, how can you help deal or adapt with this requirement of reinventing and revisiting yourself? Which means you will have to try out different things. And as was mentioned, time is of essence. So CSR or philanthropy money can actually be catalysts, keeping in mind the agility requirement that is there for solutioning the problems. The second aspect that I see is all the problems are interconnected. There's intersectionality, which means the solutions also will be on intersectionality. And which is where it's important that philanthropy flows in a convergent way to solve these intersectionality problems. And to me, that is the big shift that I see going forward in terms of how does the convergence of philanthropy happen to showcase impact at a saturation level, which can then be scaled up with through other sources. The last point at this stage, which I would look at in terms of philanthropy, it's slightly counterintuitive or paradoxical to the point where I mentioned agility. It's also patience money. Because sometimes when you're looking at solutions from grassroots, it cannot happen within 1 year. It may require commitment for next 3 years, 5 years. So philanthropy money can actually serve as patient capital. So that's what I would say at this juncture.
Yes.
I could go next. So a couple of things. I think philanthropy is not just about the financial dollars that it's bringing to the table. It's really about how important it can position itself to address the systemic barriers of the core issues that are in front of us, and also how philanthropic organizations are going to be advocating for equity, and most importantly, how we're going to be bringing about the transformation that is really needed at a community level. So how are we really trying to, through our institutions, addressing these three important issues is going to be critical. I think in all the work that we do, how do we keep the people and their aspirations front and center is going to be critical. The resources that we have, I think we view them as high-risk capital, And again, going back to your point, definitely philanthropic capital has an important role to play when it comes to newer technologies, when it comes to business models, because a lot of the work right now, I mean, innovation in itself is inherently risky. And I said, the philanthropic resources are high-risk capital. So I think, putting in more resources over there so that you can really get the business models to be viable, the technologies to be getting to a point where they can be scalable, is where the philanthropic capital can really play a very important role. Also in terms of, how do we leverage resources, public sector, private sector, again, with the high-risk capital that we bring in by either using the first loss guarantees, financial instruments that we have at place. I mean, at the foundation, of course, for us, the innovative finance piece is really, really important, and we use that constantly. We're doing a lot of program-related investments. We're doing debt, we're doing equity, and I think more and more of our work should be around that and seeing, what can really help trigger the solutions that we are after, not at the test and develop scale level, but at the scale level, because I think we don't have, yes, we need to be experimenting with new things, but what we really all need to get after is the scalable solutions, because that's really the need of the hour. I think leveraging resources, again, I can talk about our examples of what we've been able to do. 2015, we set up Smart Power India, which is a wholly owned subsidiary here in India, to really drive energy access, to promote economic development. I think with the kind of impact that we were able to create, we took that model to Myanmar, Africa, and then at COP27, we were able to announce a Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, where for the first time, 3 foundations collaborated and pooled in funding. Now, again, we talk about collaborations. I think at best we go as far as, okay, we'll share knowledge with each other, but are we really prepared to give up control and really be putting in those resources into a pool fund? So 3 foundations, and I know Shibi is sitting here from the IKEA Foundation, so $500 billion were put in by them, 500 by the Rockefeller, and we had the Bezos Earth Fund. So between the 3 of us, $1.5 billion, and we were able to leverage another $10 billion. So again, there are ways, there are examples. It isn't easy, it's tough, we are still learning, but again, that's something that's possible. We also have the co-impact piece that we've launched, where we've been able to get 60 funders together, 685 million, where they're impacting 600 million people. We need more of these examples. We've got the Global Resilient Cities Network, data.org, I can go on. But I think, again, how can we really unpack, and we don't have to all go through the same learning curve. Those of us who've kind of attempted a collaborative philanthropy, we're at different stages of evolution. How do we learn from that so that we all don't kind of make the same mistakes is really going to be important. I think each one of us is trying to do things ourselves is not going to really help us deal with the crisis. How do we really put, at times I say, our egos and logos behind and really truly walk the talk and keep the communities front and center? I think that really is going to be important as we move forward.
Thanks, Deepali. Egos and logos behind us. Aloka, Kurush, you want to add something? Or?
Yeah. Kurush, you want to add anything?
Sure. I'll just add a couple more points. So typically what I've seen is that the demand or the need is large and it cuts across spectrums. And yes, there are intersection points. There is connectivity. Even Amitabh Khan spoke about how it's all linked together. So somewhere our belief is having an element of focus helps. So instead of spreading yourself too thin, can you focus your capital in certain areas? And why that helps is, one, you can drive impact incrementally more, because instead of spreading it, you're putting in one. That's very logical. I think the second order effect is you start building more expertise in that domain. Otherwise, you're just a funder. So you start building more expertise in that area. You start co-creating things with that ecosystem. So you're not just a capital provider, but you are coming in from a domain perspective, you're coming in from a design perspective. And how can you enable? Because sometimes the partners we work with are so consumed in what they're doing that some of the forward and backward linkages either are not very apparent or the capacity is not there to execute on that. So how can you take some of those steps which are forward and backward linkages which helps it? So I think focus, building that domain, and trying to look at a picture which also encompasses some forward and backward linkages is what is a direction that we are working towards.
I'm just answering this question slightly differently because a lot has already been covered by, all of you. When we are talking about philanthropy, we are talking about two sets of people. One, I'm sitting on the side of the donor and there's a donee. So I think when we are talking about philanthropy, I think it's very important that we bring these two sets of stakeholders on the same table. Currently, what we see is that there is an approach where I, as a donor, I have certain priorities. I'm pushing it in a certain way. I think this is the way it should be done. On the other hand, the person who is actually working in the grassroots level, the need is very different. So I think as we are going through this evolving stage, I think it's extremely important for the donor and donee to speak with each other. It is happening, but still I know that, there is, because we come with very strategic focus, because at times what we don't understand is what is required at the grassroots level. So while I'm a donor, but I think that's been a big learning for me, that it's important to understand, because we as an organization, we work with organizations who are working at the grassroots level. So they know, they are the experts there when they're delivering something, right? And I'm a financial institution, I'll do best when it comes to finances. But if I'm talking about education, if I'm talking about WASH, if I'm talking about climate transition, you know that there are the experts sitting there. And the other thing is, I think the way at least India is, philanthropy capital can be used in various manners, and I think for the non-profit sector, it is important to understand that what kind of philanthropic capital is actually available to you, because currently, I know there is a lot of pressure on the non-profits, to go and come and seek funding. So they rush and come to us and say that, this is what we require. They're working, you have the compliance pressure today of utilization, of project, etc. But I think this conversation is very important between the donor and donee when you go in. Second is that at times we don't so I'll give you an example. One of our partners came to us and said, we're struggling because we're moving from project to project. And they had a huge funding from high net worth individuals. So I said, have you gone and told your HNIs that, can I use your money as corpus or as endowment? They've not had that conversation. So therefore, I think from a non-profit perspective, it will be important to understand that what is that philanthropy. It's understand where that money is coming from, and therefore also guide, because we take inputs from there, right? And you basically say that what are the pools that you can access funds from. That is one. As far as I think philanthropy is concerned, as all of you mentioned, is becoming more strategic. We are looking at things like output, outcome, impact. I don't think we spoke about so much of these terms when I joined the sector. It's becoming a lot more structured, but the fact in all this, I think Deepali made a very important point. I think we have to keep the person, the beneficiary, at the heart of it. And the second is, in many times when philanthropies are working, they are looking at the ground realities are missing. We also, at times, we go and say we want it, whereas, the partner can come and tell us, no, this is now not how it's going to be. So I think for us, if you ask me evolving, I think from a donor perspective, we have to look at buckets. We have to look at something that we are going to do catalytic financing, but will my 100% of what I'm spending will be catalytic? No. There will be some which will give us scale. There will be some which will be for collaboration. So it will have to be a mix, because, the complexities are so much. I think it will be a bit of diverse pool when we are, that's where I see that it's moving currently, to also take care of the challenges that the implementation agencies, as we call the non-profits, are facing. So,
can I just come in?
Sure.
So Aloka, on that point, I think lexicon does matter, because if you're saying donor-donee, there's a power dynamics that comes into play. I think we're consciously saying we're not going to refer to our donees as grantees, but partners. We're equal partners, right? As you said, that the expertise, the local knowledge, all that is coming from the partner. And it should be an equitable relationship where just because you have the resources doesn't give you the opportunity to dictate terms. So I think that, for me, the lexicon and how can we stop using donor-donee and get onto more of partnerships that we are building with all the institutions with whom we are working is important. Also, the trust-based piece is very important, and how can we really start walking the talk around trust-based philanthropy? How are we holding ourselves accountable to our partners as opposed to just holding them accountable around the impact that they have to deliver? How do we have skin in the game from our perspective? And the last piece is, I think in any partnership, value driven is really, what are the values that we're bringing to the table? Because at the end of the day, you can sort through a lot of things, but you can't compromise on values. So I think with philanthropic investments going forward, the more time you're spending upfront around sorting out the value alignment, really looking at trust-based work, is really going to help us deal with the complex issues. And again, how do we keep bringing women at the center, marginalized communities, indigenous population, young people, and really starting, that's really our North Star. How do we really give agency and power to the communities is what we should all be striving for.
Aloka, I just want to, if you will, I just want to double tap on the point that you are saying is, so I'm sure there's nobody, I would like to believe that there's nobody in this hall who does not subscribe to the kind of relationship that you would like to have, right, between two partners. In order to make it happen, one interesting observation that I'm just having as we are sitting here is, all of you are in the executive committees of actually making decisions in your respective organizations, all right? But a large part of the CSR fraternity or philanthropic fraternity may not be in your same shoes, right? So how do we really mainstream philanthropy into the boardrooms and actually incentivize what you want to achieve, right? When you need to have equal partnerships, so the decision making has to be given that sort of prioritization and importance. When we spoke offline, you spoke about the kind of expertise that needs to be built, subject matter and domain expertise within the organization so as to make informed judgments. So how do we make this happen? And your example would be awesome to listen to.
Yeah, it's slightly organic because, the amounts are going up. So when an organization is spending a very significant amount on anything, naturally the decision needs to be equitable, and therefore you get that to the board level, and that's what the law also tells you, that you get the board on law on, the person, the chair of the board actually takes the final decision in terms of the spending. So I think it's a great thing because you have to a largely slightly top-down approach. But the fact is the board is actually being made responsible for the spend. So that I think is the first thing. I think from a CSR perspective and, and also because, for us, I represent an organization where grant is part of the overall sustainability piece. So for us, ESG has been there for a long time. So S is part of your total E and G as well. So it's therefore you kind of have a seat on the board of the organization. So I think one of the things I've seen, and when I speak with many of my peers, is the fact is often, and I'm making a slightly controversial statement here, often I've seen there is a feeling that CSR can be done by anyone. I beg to differ because I think it's a very domain-specific work because the way it's evolved, it is a very, very, you need to understand because, like for every organization, like say a Prabhakar, he knows the consumer side the best. As an organization, my colleagues will know the financial sector the best. Similarly for each of our domains. So this is a very, very specific thing. So it is important, therefore, the domain knowledge, the technical knowledge is becoming more and more important. The second is, like I said, as soon as you move from charity to development, like say, for example, Deepali spoke about transition. It's a very technical thing, when we are talking about. It can be simplified and it's being, we are bringing in the word transition, and when we are working with our partners, so I use the word donor and donee just to make it more technical, but you're absolutely right, they're partners in the thing. But so domain knowledge is also going to be very critical to create programs which can be more impactful. And that's where I think the more you develop that, the more you become important. And of course, as a board, they all rely on the CSR team or the team to, spend that money. It's not an easy thing. You also have to understand, I often tell our partners, and as you know, we have many partners in this room, and we have partners who have been with us for more than 20 years for HSBC. So the partnership has been for over 20 years. I would say most of the folios definitely will be 10 to 12 years, even pre-compliance. Now, my point is trust building, and trust I'm building with my partner, but I'm also reflecting the same when I'm speaking with my audience internally. So when I'm speaking with my board internally, my board knows that this is the person who is going to keep we'll keep the organization at the center and we'll do the right thing. And the second is they are now also seeing the impact on ground. For example, today, if you see, a lot of you work with, say, farmers. I'm just giving an example. Farmers is your biggest supply chain that you can think of globally. So for Prabhakar, that will be the most important stakeholder. So therefore, it's somewhere the board is also now starting to realize that this is not one of these ad hoc, good to do stuff. It is now becoming, like Prabhakar said, more strategic, more involved. And as a result of which, I think the importance of CSR and philanthropy in the board is going forward is going to get an even much more bigger role than where it is today.
Thanks, Aloka. Prabhakar, just borrowing from Aloka's point, one specific question to you is that how do you build that trust? So how has the criteria for selecting your partners changed over a period of time at different stages? I'm assuming you work with partners, like Aloka said, for many, many years. At the same time, you also have partners who are probably just getting on board and starting to develop a partnership with ITC. How does the criteria change at different points in time, and therefore enabling them to build long-lasting relationships?
Sure. So just first a data point. So I was just taking stock yesterday. We work with 88 partners, implementation partners. Of the 88, close to about 23 we would have onboarded in the last 2 years. All others, most of them would have been more than 5 years. At least 35 of them are more than 10 years. Some things have changed, some things have not changed. What has not changed is alignment of values and intent. I think that still remains the same. What has changed is, and I'm sort of being very candid and open, so when a partner approaches us, is the partner approaching us for a here and now intervention, or is the partner wanting to engage keeping a long term in mind? So that's becoming a significant shift. Second, what we are also looking for is, I think Aloka referred to that, what is the expertise? And when I say expertise, there are two types of expertise. One is the whole aspect of working with the community, but also the expertise in that particular domain area. And increasingly, we're finding partners who are very, very specialized in a particular vertical. So we are now more consciously seeking out for domain expertise. The third thing that we are seeking out clearly is, and this triggered more in the last 10 years, is how open are you to driving systems and processes? Driving systems and processes for governance, impact monitoring, etc. Now with all the BRSRs and sustainability reports coming in, if partners have hesitancy to go through that diligence or audits, etc., then that's a bit of a discomfort. The last piece that has changed when we are now looking at partners is how comfortable are you working with other partners in the same catchment area? Because at the end of the day, if I have to make a difference in a particular catchment, unless my 5 or 6 partners who are working in different verticals understand each other, it's like a relay race, so to say. So do they have that intent and motivation to work along with others is becoming a newer dimension for us.
As long as they are solving similar problems.
Absolutely. No, it may not be. So what I meant is, let's say I work in a factory in Saharanpur. I may have a partner who is working on nutrition, but I also may have a partner who is working on Anganwadi. So how all of them sort of seamlessly integrate with each other so that the holistic development of that catchment happens. Earlier, that may not have been so much of a focus for us, but now with, as I said, the sense of urgency and the need for a holistic development, that's becoming more and more important, actually.
Got it. Kurush, one question to you. As somebody, as you said, as someone who is relatively new in this sort of responsibility, and borrowing from your earlier avatar in a business role, many of us in the fraternity also struggle to hire good talent in fundraising, right? I don't know if there is a definition of what is a good talent, right? So from your experience of having worked with fundraisers in the ecosystem, have there been certain observations, learnings that you would like to share, saying what constitutes a good fundraiser? What does the blood group look like of a good fundraiser?
I think a few things stand out, Sriram. One, I would like to believe that most companies would have declared or articulated what are their priority or focus areas. So at least doing some research, homework, and now you have access to all this information, right? It's pretty much there on the websites, it's there on various social media handles, it's there on your impact assessment report. So one is just understanding what is this organization into, and are we seeing some intersection from that perspective? It's also not difficult to find the type of partners being worked with. So that also gives you a flavor for are these regional, small, national, what sort of partners are being worked through. And I think with digging a bit more, typically getting some reference of somebody you already connected, because that just builds a more instant level of connect versus a cold interaction, which may start off from that sense. So on any given day, there are so many partners reaching out. It's not physically possible to even get back to all of them and engage with all of them, right? So some of these just gives you a entry point. Beyond the entry point, then it's about how can you build the confidence, and that confidence, I think Prabhakar called out, what is the ground reality? How can you show on the ground interaction? It's not about meeting in your office, but getting somebody to their location, seeing the beneficiary interactions, being open and transparent. These are my other funders. Talk to anyone, not selectively ke ye do se baat karo, right? But that gives you confidence. Acknowledging what doesn't work. As you call out, coming from the business side, even where maybe money was more easily accessible, not everything went by plan. You had enough and more issues to solve for things. And I'm realizing here is even more so true, but it's not uncommon for a partner to say everything is perfect and not believable when you are that. I think just being candid about what are the challenges, what's not working, what goes well, it's about building the trust and confidence, because then you may be able to find solutions, but it's not a perfect world, right? So I think some of those things stand out. So I think a deeper understanding of what your organization stands for, building that credibility, and finding some hook. That hook could be through beneficiaries, through a different organization, through a common partner from the funding side, a common platform. There's so many platforms like say a Nudge, right? I mean, and you are working with a bunch of partners, we are working with it. It just gives more credibility. I think having said that, I would also acknowledge that we do work with while we have a lot of old existing partners, at any given point of time, we take a lot of pride in working with a lot of new partners, and not new necessarily to us, really small partners. And then we have seen them grow, right? So we have been their dominant partners in terms of funding, etc. And then we have seen how they've grown, and with the expectation that over a period of time, you'll build a funding base. We'll enable them with connects, contacts. And I think it's been a wonderful journey to see where they started, and 3-4 years down the road, how they've been able to take things forward in terms of their ecosystem and solutions.
No, thanks, Kurush. I think that sort of, I do want to borrow from that and have a specific question for Deepali and Aloka. That Deepali, so I know that recently there was a capacity building grant for Seva that Rockefeller made, right? So things that CSR in India perhaps because of the law does not permit certain things to be done, right? So upfront investments in fundraising, right? If I have to have a 5-year fundraising strategy, we may have to make the investment right now in people, in technology, in impact, in, let's say, communications, building our own legal financial capabilities to understand the complexity of everything. So capacity building grants as a foundation, how do you look at it? And would be lovely to hear that example of Seva that you've done. And similar question, Aloka, from a CSR perspective, could you help us unravel or decode the overheads? What does that 5% really mean? Because that's the only pool of money
Most difficult question.
that allows us to make those commitments to investing in people, investing in our own capabilities, while 90% of it gets directed towards the programmatic work. So maybe Deepali and you.
Yeah, I think capacity building is critical, Sriram, and I think we're seeing that not just for the social sector, but we're also seeing that for the public sector and private sector. I mean, climate transition, climate issues are new to all of us, right? Even if we were to have all the governments across the world get all the financing that they need for climate, are we going to be able to deal with the crisis? Probably not. there's so much that we need to really build our capacities. So philanthropic capital really needs to step up and really be able to ensure that, to begin with, the social sector gets all the capacity that it needs for it to be ahead of the curve. So expertise, in technology, in fundraising, communications, building alliances. And, we are trying to walk the talk. We certainly can do better as a foundation. We have still a long way to go. And I guess, as you said, with Seva, we realized over the years that we had multiple grants that we'd given Seva, which works with over 300 million informal workers across South Asia. But the core areas where they needed support was to upgrade their technology. They're sitting on data sets which are extremely valuable, but they're not being put to good use. They can't afford to have a data scientist, but only if they had the resources to really have a data scientist as part of the team, they could use all the AI tools to be able to predict a lot of things that, they're kind of just leaving to the weather gods. So I think as an institution, we've realized how important it is, and we are trying to do our best. I also will want to point all of you to a video that I had posted a couple of months ago, which talks about baking a difference. We know what it takes to bake a cake. You need wheat, flour, water, sugar, etc. But is that all that takes to bake a cake? Really, that's not true. Because you need a professional baker, you need a range of services to be able to get the cake to be really presentable. So, looking at that analogy, if we are able to justify what it takes to really be able to buy the cake, why is it in the social sector that we are shying away from putting in the resources that are needed to build capacities? So yes, we're doing work at an individual partner level, but the other piece also that we are doing, Sriram, because time is of essence, we're trying to get our partners together, and this is where probably the corporate sector can also, we'll be happy to share our work that we've done. For example, with Sattva, we set up an India partner network where local NGOs can get a lot of skills, basic stuff around legal, HR, the requirements are changing on a daily basis. So they can get all the skill sets through this India partner network, which has been put together by Sattva. We also, as a foundation, have been hosting convenings where we're getting our partners together, and if they need skills around resource mobilization, how do we really create these convening opportunities for them, and also build alliances where partners can be supporting each other. It doesn't have to be a one-way traffic between the philanthropic organization, the partner. There's so much that they can learn from each other because they're the ones who are living that experience. So I think I'm a strong believer in terms of really building capacities, and we really need to walk the talk, right? We really need to be seeing how, if we really want to get to the communities, the people who are most closely working with them have the necessary capacities, because yes, we want to be empowering the communities, but it has to start with the interface of the institution that's working very closely with those communities.
Yeah, so, excellent. This initiative of capacity building is like, because a lot of times CSR funds are unable to do that. So that's like a huge advantage for the sector that you have organization like yours investing in it. So I don't know how many people in this audience are fundraisers. Can we take it down? How many of you are fundraisers? Okay, so all I can tell you is that you do the toughest job in this world, in this sector. Because the fact is, at this thing, I work in a bank, so I know I spend the money. So I'm in a slightly better position, and I know the guys who are going out and getting the money, making the money, it's equally difficult. So for you, we understand the difficulties that you face when it comes to fundraising. I think two or three things to what Prabhakar, Kurush, and Deepali have already shared. I think three things that we've seen when it comes to fundraising and it's worked. One is the fundraisers connect with the program person. Because we've seen often that there is a sector, some fundraisers who, because of the pressure, is not really connected with the program people. So I think fundraising and program goes hand in hand. That gives a lot of confidence to the philanthropist, which I think is one big thing. Second is I've seen excellent fundraisers who have been very patient, and they've actually kept in touch. So what has happened is when you're keeping in touch, you are basically just building trust, because you're just saying that I'm there. It's not necessarily it's aligning with what your, as a corporate, your priorities are, but it's just letting you know this is what is happening in my world. And that has actually created many partnerships for us. In this room, I can see a few faces they've been in touch with for 3-4 years to then have a partnership for a very long time. So that's another thing. And the third piece is, I already mentioned, knowing that what are the kind of funding that's available, it may be a good idea. Also to speak with your, somebody who's working with us, I can also tell them that, look, this is what is available in the market, so why don't you go and speak? So that's to understand the kind of philanthropic money that's available in the market, it's important. And the fourth piece, which is your most difficult question and which I was skirting for so long, is overheads. It's a very, very difficult topic, I'll be honest with you. But I think, currently, and I know that I have my team members here as well, we are working with the organizations on this overhead piece. Because, the overhead piece is also to do with compliance. That's where the big challenge lies, I'm sure, with us. Deepali, you're saved from there. But for Prabhakar, Kurush and myself, that will be a big challenge for us. What's the overhead and how we're going to... I think simpler solutions, getting a board... For example, this is how we have defined overheads in HSBC. So we're working on a very simple formula. Now you will say, Aloka, why will it be acceptable to everyone? No, it may not be. So what we are doing is we will be taking it to our ExCo, which is the board equivalent for the bank, to say, this is how we are going to do it. This is what it means. And therefore, that becomes easier. So that's, I think, it will have to be slightly evolving because there's no definition at this point of time. A very small example before I close, many years back when we were supporting education programs, I remember there used to be a massive problem with salaries. I walked into a room and everybody would say, oh, the full grant is going towards paying teachers' salaries. So we basically told them, you send your kids to school for what? For your books, pencils, and the things that you give, or you go for the best teachers, or you're sending to the best university with the best faculty. So that is your program cost. It cannot be salary cost. So therefore, that's evolved. Today, if you see education programs, teacher salary is not considered to be salaries as part of your administration cost. Right. So I think this overhead cost will evolve. But that's something that we are trying to address in this manner.
I just want to give maybe
briefly, sorry, we're really running short of time, but yeah,
just,
please.
Just building upon Deepali's example. See, those examples are very strategic at a large scale. If I were to give the other end of the spectrum, where there are some examples on a very micro level. So we focus quite extensively on people with disabilities, both in terms of the various interventions and from a skilling perspective. And typically these are much smaller organizations. They are very individual-led organizations. It stems from some personal experience personally or with the family. So capability there is a clear difference versus most of the other segments we work with. So there, some of the examples that we think are helping and we need to continue taking steps in that sense. There's a huge gap of availability of skilled people or therapists in that space. So one of the ways we're trying to solve for that is we are dovetailing that with a skilling program. That how can we create a skilling program, because then that feeds into that spectrum from a need perspective. We have good partners, like say if I quote a name, Umid, they do very good work in this space, but they're very Bombay focused. They have a lot of good capabilities. So we've run a program where they're building similar capabilities in other geographies so that that capability gets built in. Most of them, as you called out, technology, HR practices, digital marketing, very, very weak point. One approach is send them from some of the programs, but what we're trying to do, and again, not done successfully yet, but it's an attempt is, those are skills that our employees have. So this is not volunteering go for a Sunday and do something, but it's saying that I will work with you on a certain problem area and help you as part of it. So we're trying to create some sort of a in-house program where our employees with those skills, which are requirement, they will work closely with these partners and work on specific solutions for what they're looking into.
Okay. Thanks so much, Kurush. We are really running out of time, but I'm going to give the last word and a question to Prabhakar and Aloka in that order of saying, if you had, and very briefly, if you had one recommendation as a suggestion to the CSR law in India, what would that be?
I think minimize the ambiguities that are there in the law leading to a lot of wrong interpretations, whether it's in terms of overheads or in terms of ongoing projects, make it much more clearer, keeping all stakeholders in perspective. The law is drafted keeping corporates in mind, but I think keeping the entire ecosystem in mind, how do you make it more easy to understand, reduce the scope of misinterpretations?
Aloka?
So we'll keep it very brief. I think, if there's clarity, because there's a lot of focus on blended finance, there's a lot of focus on outcome funding, etc. If a little bit more clarity in terms of, if a percentage, or from that 2%, if a percentage can be spent on innovation or innovative financing or catalytic financing, as we spoke about, then that will make it much more easier to have some, because that's something where we are on the verge of getting into the space of getting catalytic funding in the sector. So that would be good to have.
Awesome. Thank you so much to all the panelists, for the time. I hope the discussion was useful and has added value. So thank you so much, everybody, for your questions that came in. Sorry we couldn't take all of them, but hopefully we'll get enough time with all of them along the sidelines of Chacha. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel for the depth and candor of response. Sriram, they made your job look easy and enjoyable. Thank you all very much. We will now be breaking for lunch. We will see you at 2:30 here in this auditorium to talk about navigating AI in the workplace. Lunch is being served in 3 locations: in the Stein balcony lobby, the Silver Oak lobby, and the theater lobby. Let me repeat that: the Stein balcony lobby, the theater lobby, and the Silver Oak lobby. See you in an hour. Thank you.